Thank you. Yukong's presentation had an unusual data point that I want to talk about before I begin my speech. And that is, many of you may have noticed that he noted that there were 42 states that had some dynamic about race-based preferences. Some of you may be wondering, why isn't it 50 states? And I am here to tell you why it is not 50 states, and that is because Mr. Ward Connerly, who will be our speaker later today, is responsible for 8 of those 50 states, which represents nearly 1/3 of all high school students in America live in a state in which race-based classifications and preferences have been outlawed, either through legislative action in the state of New Hampshire or by citizen initiative. That wouldn't have happened without Ward Connerly. So I want to salute my boss, my old boss, and thank him for that. I have been asked to give you a brief description of the facts that Students for Fair Admissions uncovered about Harvard's admissions policies during our 5+ years of litigation. But before I do that, I'd like to tell you a little something about Students for Fair Admissions and ask for your help in keeping these lawsuits on track. First, Students for Fair Admissions was formed in 2014 as a not-for-profit membership organization. We began in 2014 with about 30 members. Today, we have about 23,000 members. Because some of our members applied to the University of Texas and Harvard and UNC and were rejected, we, as an organization, have the right to bring a legal challenge to these schools. You may recall that no student's identity over these last 5+ years has ever been revealed to the public, and we intend to keep it that way. So here is how you can help. In every admissions cycle, as these cases continue, we need to add rejected students to our membership rolls. This keeps all of these lawsuits from being dismissed for lack of standing. So please encourage any student that you know who has been rejected from Harvard, the University of Texas, or the University of North Carolina to please go to our website and join Students for Fair Admissions. Tell us a little bit about your academic background. Once I am personally made aware of a new member, I will reach out and give more specific information about how they can help. And by the way, this should be a comfort to all of us that Students for Fair Admissions membership fee is capped at $10 for a lifetime membership. So it's a bargain in addition to helping keep these lawsuits on track. As many of you know, SFFA sued Harvard in 2014. During the discovery phase of the lawsuit, Students for Fair Admissions took nearly 30 depositions from Harvard's officials. We reviewed 40,000 emails. 40,000 emails, can you imagine? We read dozens of internal memos, and most importantly, we analyzed 6 years of admissions data that Harvard was compelled to give us. This data represents about 160,000 applicants. Here are the questions that we pursued. And much of this information that I'm about to give you has come from our experts' analysis. Dr. Peter Arcidiacono of Duke University was our primary economist who looked at this. Here are the questions that we asked. Are Harvard's admissions decisions based against Asian American applicants in the scoring? I'm sorry, let me start over. Are Harvard's admissions decisions biased against Asian American applicants in the scoring and/or selection of applicants for admissions. Next, what role does an applicant's race or ethnicity play in admissions decisions by Harvard? And finally, and this is important, does Harvard set floors or ceilings on the admission of any racial or ethnic group in making admissions decisions? So, Dr. Arcidiacono used statistical and econometric methods of analysis in pursuing those questions, and here's what he found. First, Asian American applicants as a whole are stronger on many objective measures, much more than any other racial or ethnic groups, including scores on standardized tests, academic achievements, and extracurricular activities. Second, Asian American applicants suffer a statistically significant penalty relative to white applicants in two of the most important ratings Harvard admissions officers assign to each file. And those are the personal rating, and we'll talk about this more, and the overall rating. Next, Asian American applicants also suffer a statistically significant penalty relative to white applicants in the admissions decisions themselves, even aside from the penalty in the personal and overall ratings. And finally, race plays an overwhelming role in admissions decisions. So, let's look at the numbers. Consider the example of an Asian American applicant who is male, who is not disadvantaged, and has other characteristics that result in a 25% chance of admission to Harvard. Simply changing the race of this applicant to white and leaving all other characteristics the same would increase his chance of admission to 36%, from 25 to 36% if he's white. Changing his race to Hispanic and leaving all other characteristics the same would increase his chance of admission to 77%. And finally, changing his race to African American, again, leaving all characteristics the same, would increase his chance of admission to 95%, from 25% Asian to 95% African American. Next, Asian American applicants are negatively affected by preferences for athletes and legacies, though the combined negative effects of these preferences on Asian American admit rates is smaller than the penalty Asian Americans face as a result of being treated differently than their white applicants who are not legacies or athletes. Next, for the 2011, 2012, and 2013 admission cycles, Harvard has maintained African American admissions rate at nearly exactly the same level of admissions rate for all other domestic applicants. Now, I'm comforted that Rick Sander is on this panel who can explain this data point far greater than I can, far better than I can, but here is that point. Picture this. It is within 0.00064%. And the probability that the difference in admissions rate would be smaller than 0.000 blah, 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 in each of the 3 years is less than 0.2%, absent direct manipulation, and is consistent with Harvard having a specific floor on African American admit rates. Now let me explain a little bit about what this data means. Asian American applicants to Harvard as a group have, on average, the highest objective academic credentials. In the expanded data set that we analyzed, that came out during our trial, their average SAT score, this is math plus verbal, is 24.9 points higher than white applicants. This is at Harvard. 153.9 points higher than Hispanic applicants, and 217 points higher than African American applicants. Yet despite being more academically qualified than the other three major racial and ethnic groups, Asian American applicants have the lowest admissions rates. In fact, data produced by Harvard show that this has been true for every admissions cycle for the classes of 2000 through 2019. A closer examination of the 6 years for which Harvard produced applicant-level admissions data, that's for this lawsuit, shows that even removing those who receive some other form of preferences, such as legacy, athletic, or early action, still results in Asian Americans having the lowest admit rates over this period. For the class of 2014 through the class of 2019, Asian Americans made up roughly 22% of domestic students admitted to the freshman class at Harvard. If Harvard relied exclusively on its pure academic index that it assigns to each applicant in making its own domestic admissions decisions, the Asian American share of domestic admitted freshmen over these same 6 years would be over 50%. So let me just rephrase that. If we eliminate everything other than the hard academic numbers, the percent of Asian Americans admitted to Harvard would exceed 50%. What was revealed during our trial last fall in evaluating applications for admissions, Harvard naturally, we're not arguing that Harvard needs to be Caltech, Harvard naturally considers factors other than academics, assigning each applicant 4 component scores and an overall score. The component scores are known as the academic, extracurricular, athletic, and personal ratings. Those are the 4. Academic, extracurricular, athletic, and personal ratings. You've heard about the personal ratings. We're about to hear more. The overall rating is a score that purports to reflect Harvard's overall assessment of the applicant. It is not an average of these scores, but it takes them into account. Harvard also assigns scores that rate the quality of the teacher and guidance counselor recommendation letters. Furthermore, if the applicant interviewed with an alum, the scores on the personal and overall rating of the interviewer are also recorded. Accepting Harvard's scoring of applicants at face value, Harvard imposes a penalty against Asian American applicants as compared to whites in the selection of admissions, of applicants for admissions. This penalty has a significant effect on an Asian American's overall probability of admissions. You will recall that an Asian American who, based on his observed characteristics, test scores, Harvard ratings, etc., has a 25% chance of admission. Yet this applicant would have his admissions probability increased to over 36% had he been treated as a white applicant. But race also factors into some of the rating components, particularly those that are the most subjective. On the more objective measures, Asian American applicants are exceedingly strong. Recall that Asian American applicants were stronger than any of the other 3 groups on objective academic credentials. Naturally then, Asian American applicants rank higher than any other group based on the academic rating. In particular, the most competitive applicants receive a 1 or a 2, the two best scores on the academic rating. So here's where this leads us. So 58.6% of Asian American applicants receive a 1 or a 2 compared to 44.7% of whites, 14.7% of Hispanics, and 7.3% of African Americans. That is a startling gap in what Harvard itself uses as a measurement. Asian American applicants likewise have very strong extracurricular ratings. Again, ranking higher on average than any of the 3 other groups. This is extracurricular. Asians score and rank the highest of all 4 racial and ethnic groups. Asian American applicants, however, do not score well on the personal rating and on the overall rating relative to other racial and ethnic groups, especially when compared to other groups within the same academic deciles. Rick can go into perhaps some greater explanation of that. On the personal rating, Asian Americans have the lowest share of a group receiving 1 or 2 of the 4 groups that are categorized here. There is no observable reason why this should be so. The testimony that we took from officers and leaders in the Harvard admissions office suggests that there is, quote, nothing about Asian Americans as a group that would suggest they have less personal qualities. That's what Harvard tells us. Ratings given by alumni interviewers do not show this pattern either. On personal factors, however, such as courage, likability, leadership, you talked about this, Lee, kindness, and being well respected, Asian Americans score the lowest, consistently score the lowest, year after year after year, academic decile by academic decile. Well, look, whether you as an individual support the use of race-based affirmative action to create diversity, or you don't support it, this is deeply, deeply troubling. And I think the fact that this came out in trial and the fact that this is still now a topic of discussion within the general American conversation about university admissions is very helpful to this case. Using the baseline data set of the model Dr. Arcidiacono constructed, we found the following. Let me go over this one more time because I think it's instructive. You will recall that an Asian American applicant who was male, who was not disadvantaged, and whose characteristics result in a 25% chance of admission would have more than a 36% chance of admission if he were treated as a white applicant, more than a 75% chance of admission if he were treated as an Hispanic, and more than a 95% chance of admission if he were treated as an African American. Next, removing racial and ethnic preferences, both preferences for African Americans and Hispanics, and penalties for Asian Americans, while holding the total number of admits constant in each of these 6 years, would increase the number of Asian American admits by over 674 over the 6-year period, more than a 46% increase. Yes, Lee, I understand this is not about increasing the number of any one racial or ethnic group to any one college. I agree with that. But the fact that 674 more Asians would have attended Harvard, but for the kinds of penalties that Harvard is now giving to Asian Americans, I find very troubling. Notably, this is interesting, and we'll talk about this more, I'm sure, today, Harvard's preferential treatment for African American and Hispanic applicants is not the result of efforts to achieve socioeconomic diversity. Rather, preferences for African Americans and Hispanics are significantly smaller if the applicant is economically disadvantaged. Yeah, that's a head scratcher. Let me read that again. Preferences for African Americans and Hispanics are significantly smaller if the applicant is economically disadvantaged. While students flagged by the admissions office as disadvantaged generally receive a modest boost in admissions, this is not true for African Americans who achieve no such boost, and the boost is cut in half for Hispanics. In other words, Harvard is not employing racial preferences in an effort to benefit disadvantaged minority students. Harvard admits more than twice as many non-disadvantaged African American applicants than disadvantaged African American applicants. This would not be the case if Harvard eliminated racial preferences, but provided a uniform preference for socioeconomic status. Under that scenario, disadvantaged African American admits would outnumber non-disadvantaged African American admits. So let me wrap up by discussing Harvard's internal analysis of the disadvantage that African Americans face. Now, this is Harvard's internal studies. As many of you may recall from the trial, in response to a few articles that appeared in the New York Times, Harvard's leaders initiated an internal study in 2013 to examine the question of Asian discrimination before SFFA filed this lawsuit. We filed in 2014. This is an action that Harvard undertook a year before without SFFA even existing. SFFA's findings, our trial analysis, are consistent with and reinforced by the independent work of Harvard's own Office of Institutional Research, Harvard's internal think tank, if you will, which examined the effect of race on various admissions processes at Harvard. Those internal studies drew upon 10 years of Harvard's own admissions data. The Harvard report found the following. This is Harvard's own report. Number one, Asian American applicants, on average, had stronger academic credentials than other applicants. Well, that's what we found. Harvard's admissions officers assigned significantly lower personal scores to Asian Americans as compared to whites. The difference is notable because similar ratings by teachers, guidance counselors, and alumni interviewers do not show nearly as much difference between those two groups. Harvard's own Office of Institutional Research found that Asian Americans would comprise 43.4% of the admitted class under an academics-only model compared to their actual 18.7% share. It would be 31% even after accounting for Harvard's preference for recruited athletes and legacies, and it would be 26% even after accounting for the applicants' extracurricular activities and the personal ratings. This is not what we came up with. This is what Harvard came up with. As some of you will recall from the media accounts of the trial and our earlier motions for summary judgment, Harvard was widely embarrassed by its unresponsiveness to its own internal report. I may be wrong, but it is my belief that Harvard's OIR report will be one of the most important pieces of evidence the courts will highlight as this case moves through the district court and the appellate courts and hopefully the Supreme Court. I'd like to thank AACE and UConn for giving us this opportunity to come